Good day, everyone, and thank you for attending today. My name is Ryan Miller. I'm the founder and president of Etna Interactive. Now, before we begin, I want to spend just a moment again talking about the technology we'll be using today for our webinar, and then also to give a little context to today's presentation. I think I'm very excited today. We have more than 300 people registered to attend, representing more than a dozen clinical specialties, and it looks like as well from 10 different countries. So we have a very broad spectrum of types of practice and specific regional interests. For those that are unfamiliar with the GoToWebinar control panel, located on the right side of your screens is a gray box. In it, there is a little tab with the word questions. If you haven't done so already, click the plus sign to the left of the word questions. That will expand that box, leaving room for you to type questions throughout the presentation. Because we are scheduled to have hundreds of people attending the webinar today, it would be disruptive to have all of that audio happening in the background. So all of our communication will happen this way. I'll be able to speak to you, and you'll be able to type back to me using that questions box. Please do feel free to type your questions as they come up. If I'm able, we'll address them in real time, taking a quick break from the presentation. Some of the questions we'll save to the end of the 45-minute session, and we'll answer them then. That said, let's dive right in and talk about what the goal of the presentation is today. What I'm hoping to do, for those of you who are practice leaders on the call, is to expand your thinking and help you to recognize some of the new and emerging opportunities in the way you will service your patients and prospects online. For those of you on the call that are on the front lines, that are directly servicing patients, hoping to help you understand where you have an opportunity to have a greater impact in your practice's bottom line. Now, originally, we'd focused the title of the presentation on is maybe not a standard term. It's somewhat confusing. And many people think of the front office nursing, administrative, clinical staff, all of the people who touch your patients, your receptionist, if you have a practice that's large enough to support a marketing manager, your patient care coordinator and practice manager, how all of those people play a critical role today and into the future in servicing your patients and prospects. So that said, let's acknowledge what this is really about is about shifting perspectives. Now let me open, just for those of you who aren't familiar with Etna, we have some people who are joining us, I think, for the first time on this particular webinar. We're an online marketing agency servicing the medical industry. We work with dozens of specialties across North America. We've been around for the last 14 years. And while I think of us as a boutique, we are a staff of 60 locating and working here from our offices in California. Now, opening with a little bit of a story, I was lucky enough at the New Year to have the opportunity to visit Thailand. And during my trip through Bangkok, I had kind of an obligatory stop I felt I had to make, visiting the Mandarin Oriental. Now, why stop there? Because I had lots of friends who said, the view of the river is fantastic, but more importantly, they have the best service in a country that's known for exceptional service. And unfortunately, the truth of my experience there was that it was the worst service of every place that I visited on that trip to Thailand. And what it made me realize is that this resort had built their reputation on service and was failing to deliver on that promise. That the marketing they used, their actual message, was about using service as a marketing advantage. Now, anybody who's visited a luxury resort, we understand the value proposition coming from these resorts is about fast, personalized service, really exceptional moments of being cared for by a staff that is truly gifted at creating exceptional, uncommon experiences. And yet, I think we all know too well that many cases today, when we show up at a hotel room or a hotel or a resort, we're left unattended. We're busy waiting in lines, trying to get our vacation, our experience started, and we're left wanting. And we know in those moments that we're watching. We're watching the staff that are idle or chatting with each other. We're watching the service that's delivered to those people who are ahead of us in those lines. And the truth is that today, customer service, the way that you service your patients, it is marketing. And more importantly, that now today, customer service has become a spectator sport. The way that you service both patients and prospects is evident to all the world, especially when we look at how it is that you are servicing those patients online. Now, there are three forces that are making a significant influence to drive a change in the way that we, that we service that patient audience. Now, the three of those together are important to acknowledge because I think they add up to tell a really compelling story. So the first of those is something that we've talked about in the past. It's the idea that inquiries are fragmenting. Now, this is being recorded, and for those of you that want, you can come back. Phenomenon. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that while service is fragmenting and your patients are trying to talk to you on the comment section of your blog, they're approaching you directly on social media, they still expect fast service. And when we add that up with the knowledge from the studies that we've and that others have done in the area of reputation management, that the majority of negative reviews stem from service issues, all of these things come together to create a perfect storm that says, you know what? We need to get our act together when it comes to how we service patients online. So let's just talk about a couple of things. Now, I'm going to do an exemplar search here. We search Google for Botox San Francisco. And what you notice is that the first three organic results, Yelp, Yelp, and Yelp. Well, this may not be this way forever, but today what we see is that many of the ratings and review sites, many of the local directories are dominating Google's first page. They are moving your potential patients and your patients maybe away from your own website and towards these third-party platforms. So as we look closely here and we look at what Yelp has to say and offer, we notice a couple of things. That we have the opportunity here to message this business directly. And what we see, let's just take a closer look. This is the possibility of private messaging this practice on the Yelp platform. Now, whatever you think about Yelp aside, Yelp thinks that timely service matters. And would you reach out to a practice that is currently responding to inquiries in 4 weeks? My guess is that you wouldn't. That if you're a consumer, you're going to move on. And this isn't a phenomenon that's just happening because practices are ignoring Yelp. Now, I acknowledged in the beginning that in our call today, we have representatives of many different clinical specialties on the call. RealSelf is one that is a website that is incredibly popular for the aesthetic disciplines, plastic surgery, dermatology, facial plastic surgery, dentistry, just as examples. But what I want to acknowledge is that today, I had a great conversation with their president about a week ago. Today, their number's up to 40,000 direct inquiries that they delivered to doctors monthly. These are private messages inside their platform from an interested patient trying to connect with a doctor. Now, their data back is that 40% of those inquiries, 40% of 40,000 inquiries today are going unanswered every month by those practices. Right? And this data follows what we see on other platforms. You know, Facebook today isn't just about public posts and messages. It's also about direct private messages. I've blurred the names here to protect privacy of both the practice and these people. But what we see is that lots of messages are being generated, and just like Yelp, Facebook now enables businesses to signal how responsive they are. This is a very responsive business here in our local market. They typically reply within minutes. They're using customer service not just as a tool for marketing, but as a discrete service advantage that is allowing businesses to gain an edge. Now, it's not an accident that they're prioritizing displaying signals of your response timing. The research that has been repeated again and again shows that the optimal response time, if you want the chance to convert someone who's visiting you online on any one of these platforms into a new patient for your practice, the optimal response time is much faster than you think, or than I think many of you are going to be happy about. It's 5 minutes. And the longer you wait, the harder it is that you're going to connect with that person. The less likely it is that you're going to connect with that person. and ever be able to encourage them to come in and visit with you. And it's not because people have unrealistic expectations. It's because they have busy lives. And the moment that they reach out to you, they may only have a 30-minute window before they have to get the kids to soccer or get back from their lunch hour and into their office and move on to the rest of their life. And those practices that are fast and efficient about responding are the ones who are going to earn that opportunity to win that patient's business. Now, we do a lot of work in ophthalmology as well, and I love to use this as an example. This isn't a client of ours, but it came up as a part of our research into ophthalmology and reputation last year. And I don't expect you to read all this text, but let me pull out what I think the most critical passage is and zoom in on it. It says, I do not regret leaving this place. I'd rather my cataract take over my eye and I turn into Storm from X-Men than have my eye even looked at by these people. Now, what this person's experience was is that they came into the office, they were forced to wait what felt like a really unacceptable length of time, and they chose to leave without receiving any kind of service from the practice. And they didn't just leave the practice, they left this review on Yelp. And it echoes what our experience was in a detailed study of the reputation of, we've done it now in plastic surgery, we've done it in dermatology, we've done it in ophthalmology, is that communication and service problems are typically 5 to 8 times more likely to motivate a negative review on one of the major rating and review sites than in clinical outcomes. Patients aren't complaining about the care that you're giving, they're complaining about the service that they receive. And so when we add all of these 3 ideas up, the compelling case that I'm trying to make for you today is that patient inquiries are changing, but their service expectations aren't. They still expect you to be there, to be engaged in the conversation, and to be responding in a way that's prompt and professional. And what that means for practice is that we aren't magically growing tons and tons of new patients in most of your specialties. So if you want to hold on to or you want to gain market share, you have to evolve your communication practices. You have to be ready to go and meet patients where they are. And that means thinking differently about service and playing a different role as leaders inside of your practices. So let's talk about thinking about service differently. Now, I owe a lot of people thanks for this presentation. We had fantastic input from Karen Zupko and her team, for those of you that know their consultancy. I have to thank the people over at BSM Consulting for some great input that they provided about the roles that are evolving inside of practices. We had fantastic input from our own team here that works closely with clinics every day, and great data like this from Care Credit that highlights the journey that patients go through from the time they start their research to the point where they are actually ready to begin a relationship with the practice. Now, patients, what they found, are spending between 76, now that lower number is for those of you on the call who are aligned with some of the more clinical or medically necessary specialties, up to 145 days, and we see that number being more aligned with the truly elective specialties and elective procedures, but 76 to 145 days of research before they contact a practice. And that's important to embrace, because the moment the contact happens, you may be burning this long journey that the patient was on, that huge opportunity they're presenting to you. When that moment comes and they choose you for their outreach, are you going to be there to answer their inquiry? Right? And so what we know from the research that we've done is that many practices are still struggling just with the idea of answering the emails that come to their practice in a timely and professional manner. Now, we've done this research in about 7 clinical specialties, I think, most recently, which at the end of last year, we looked at ophthalmology in particular. And what we found when we did secret shopping for 100 ophthalmology practices was that 64% didn't respond to the email inquiries within 7 business days. Now, many of you will step back and say, well, wait a minute, my practice is busy, right? You know, I have staff members that are greeting real human beings that are coming into our practice. They're answering our phones, which are important. They're busy with administrative activities and filing. Maybe they're chatting over the water cooler, or asleep at their desks, or just setting your money on fire. Right? Because what's happening when we're ignoring so many inquiries are coming in is that any investment the practice is making in marketing, online or off, we're burning that opportunity. Now, for those of you that aren't ophthalmology practices on this call, some of you are kind of probably laughing and shrugging and saying, well, that's not us. Well, the truth is what we found is that at best, the best performing clinical specialties in handling the inquiries that are coming in by email are only answering on average about 60% of the time. Right? So somewhere between 4 and 6 inquiries across the spectrum of clinical practices in North America, 4 to 6 inquiries on average are being completely ignored, and this is unacceptable. So my first call for everybody that's joined us today is to set some clear priorities and acknowledge that if you haven't yet mastered handling your phone and email inquiries, start there first, because they still represent the bulk of the communications that are coming to your practice. This webinar today is really focused on those practices that are already strong in phone. They're on top of their email, and they're looking to the future and saying, where do we go next? So start with your email. You know, what do you do? What could you do? Mystery shop yourself. Set up a Gmail account, complete one of your online forms, and then just set a stopwatch and see how long it takes before you hear back from one of those practices, from a member of your practice. Take the time to evaluate not just the response timing, but the message quality. It'll give you a sense of whether or not you're ready to do what we're talking about today and look to these other platforms to stay connected with your patients. Now, it's an interesting note. I'll take a second here and remind all of you, you have the opportunity to type in questions in real time and have those be visible to me while we're still going through today's webinar. I'll hold on to those that I need to for the end of the presentation, but some we may be able to answer in real time. And also take a break and tell a little story. When we were doing our research with ophthalmology, it was a really startling thing that we saw. For a lot of those practices that we were looking at, when we tried to get 100 practices to test, one of the challenges that we ran into is a lot of clinics simply didn't offer an email form on their website. But almost to the one, those same clinics that didn't have an email form also had a link. They did offer a link to Facebook. And what we found was that, you know, when for practices saying, well, we really don't want email, we're not going to give you an email form, that patients were so desperate to engage in electronic communications that they were posting personal, private, medical details on public posts on Facebook trying to get a message back from the practice. So what I want you to stop and think about are some of the mixed signals that you may be putting out into the world about how it is you want people to communicate. Because many of us will say, I don't want to engage in private and direct communications on Yelp, but you know what? It's going to happen. I don't want to receive private or direct messaging on my blog. Well, if you have comments enabled, patients are likely to be posting there, so you better be watching. And what it means today is in these various channels. They want to do it on Facebook, on your blog, on Twitter, on Instagram. And if you're not there, if you're not a part of that conversation, that actually is a message as well. You know, this is an interesting book. A member of my team, Ashley Williams, my social media manager, turned me on to this. And I think the author, I think, is really on something. It's really a fascinating read. And what he found was that 25 to 30% of customer complaints today are going unanswered. It's another form of, of communication that's happening online today. And our own experience anecdotally in the medical space, it's actually probably twice that norm. He looked at things like, online commerce and a bunch of different industries, not just at medicine, and had some really inspiring ideas to share about how we need to adapt to this new way of consumer communication. Now, I think that what we have to acknowledge is that when we're ignoring communications, whatever the form, we're missing opportunity. Let me give you 2 examples to begin to maybe broaden your understanding of what I'm talking about. So a great example here, one of our clients, again, I'll use an example from ophthalmology and I'll show you another here in aesthetics, was a gentleman who had written in on Facebook actually and left a 3-star review. And our team works with this practice and in our diligent effort to try to address any missed opportunity for great service, we wrote back and just said, thanks for this review. We really appreciate the feedback. How could we have turned that 3-star into a 5-star review? And simply by opening this communication, what we found is that Bob's feeling was actually the practice was a 5-star practice. He didn't know why it was 3. We were able to go back, give Bob a little bit of direction, and Bob actually today has since revised that review and that turned that 3-star into a 5-star. And a great example here where a little bit of communication allowed us to turn a negative experience, or what will look like a negative experience, into a positive one. Similarly, another example here from Facebook, this example in the aesthetic space, again, we're blurring names to protect the practice and the patient, but we're partnered with the practice, we're actively engaged in supporting them on social media. We had somebody complain about, not surprisingly, an extended wait time with the practice. They had left a negative review, and ultimately, through reaching out, what did this person say? Wow, thanks for surprising me. Here's my name. I'm actually interested in the consultation. And that person who was an enemy of the practice, who left a negative review, just by the simple act of being there to communicate, they've taken down the negative review, and they're now a loyal follower of this practice. They've since come in and had that service that they reported in for in the first place. Now, we've got a couple of great questions coming in about HIPAA, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. But let's just take a moment to sum up, what does this evolution mean for you? Where do we need to go? Where do we need to bring the members of your team so that you can succeed kind of in this new world that we're all living in? Well, one of the things is we have to we have to really sort of get in there and address those direct messages that are coming up at us at social media, on some of the local platforms, and we have to be actively engaged in monitoring our blogs. Feedback means that there needs to be somebody on your team that's gathering and organizing all the feedback that's coming in from these various channels, the reviews that you're getting on these different sites, and deliver insight up to practice leaders so that you can spot when there are systemic problems and make a change. And then finally, we need to look at reviews and recognize that we need a champion inside the practice who's encouraging, who's monitoring, who's responding, and escalating selected reviews so that we can ultimately portray the best possible face for our practices on the web. Now, I'm going to take a pause here for a second because I think there are some great questions coming in. And let's talk briefly about how the rules for HIPAA factor into email communications with prospective patients. Now, Nancy, that's a great question. And what I'll try to do is we actually have a recorded webinar inside of our Learning Center about HIPAA-compliant communication that I can send to you. But here we are in brief. There are a number of practices that are required or suggested under HIPAA that allow you to fully disclose to patients as it relates to electronic communications that first their message that they are voluntarily sending to you, and then your follow-up reply are happening outside of an encrypted channel, that if they are concerned about that they should move off of this channel. For some of you, your practice will offer an encrypted messaging platform. For others, you may just choose to motivate them to switch over to phone. Or if they continue to prefer to simply use unencrypted email, that they acknowledge that there is an ongoing risk that A, the message could be intercepted, or B, that someone other than their intended recipient might see that message. So we just need to keep reminding patients, if they prefer to use email, that that's a potential risk. And whenever possible, we want to strip any PHI out of those replies. And similarly, there's lots of questions that come up to responding to reviews. Now, we're not lawyers. We can't give legal advice. But what we've seen advised as best practices is that generic acknowledgments that thank the party for their commentary without sharing any details or confirming they were in fact a patient with your practice are acceptable from the lawyers that we've spoken with. So there's great ways to get there. Now I want to shift just a little bit, and let's talk about the opportunities that you have as leaders in the practice. Now, leader doesn't just mean that you're the doctor or the practice manager. I know that we have many receptionists, we have patient care coordinators, we have marketing leaders on this call. This is a chance for you at any level to take the lead inside of your practice. So, really quickly, let's talk about the 5 things that you need to do to define, to lead the way in evolving the service that you offer at your practice. We have to recognize that these are different skills than many of our staff have today. Define those skills and help guide them to get the training that they need. We have to adapt both the recruiting and the training, set some operational parameters, and define some protocols so that the practice, we just talked a moment ago about security, so the practice is protected, distribute the responsibilities among team members, and then where possible, use technology to the advantage of the office. So let's talk about that first point and defining the new skill set. And I've got to give BSM Consulting credit on this one. They are doing this amazing thing in ophthalmology. I'm begging them to offer it for other clinical specialties, and it might be a while before that happens, where they have created a program to certify patient support specialists. They're doing exactly what I think I'm calling out for the industry at large here today, which is elevating the level of professionalism and diversifying the skill set so that today's front office staff, everybody who's facing the patient, is ready to be successful in this changing landscape. You know, we have to be good at customer service and the logistics of patient care. We have to understand privacy. In the US, we have to understand HIPAA. In Canada, we have to understand PAPETA. We have to be really effective at scheduling. There's fascinating data that's been offered up by the team over at Real Patient Ratings about what it is that correlates during the patient's experience to a patient ultimately booking a procedure with an elective medical practice. And the strongest correlation appears to be between a successful scheduling experience for that first consultation and them ultimately booking a procedure. So scheduling, we know, is important. They have to know your procedures. They have to have great verbal and now great written communication skills. They have to be proficient on the computer more than ever before and actually understand the online platforms. How do I use Facebook? How do I respond to a comment on the blog? And they've got to have strong situational awareness. They have to know what's happening in the practice. What are our marketing priorities? How do I credential the doctor? What specials may be running? And this is a really tall order. It may be different than many members of your front office staff think of their responsibilities today, which means we may have to adapt either our recruiting or our training mechanisms. In my preparation for this webinar, I had a great conversation with Karen Zupko. She reminded me that she's a strong advocate for testing during the recruiting process. I know that she uses a site called Total Testing to test things like customer service aptitude, writing abilities, and computer proficiency, so that we're not just taking resumes at face value when we're finding great members for our teams. At the same time, we have to look for training opportunities to develop those skill sets, participation in webinars like this, attending conferences and symposium, going to specialty events where practice members can elevate their skill sets in all of those key areas that we discussed. We have to set some clear operational parameters as well. And this is the place maybe where I'll slow down for a second and we'll talk about some opportunities that you have. Many of you on the call are with solo practices. Some are with large groups. And depending on your operational reality, your approach to this first point may be very different. You may have to look at it and say, does it make sense operationally and financially to extend our hours for electronic service into the evenings or the weekends? We have practices that we hear today are answering emails late into the night that have staffed up on the weekend, and they find a compelling case because of the increase it has on realizing an actual new patient relationship from the inquiry that's coming in from these electronic channels. Your practice leaders need to sit down and decide, is this right for us? And it may require some testing. You may try it and ultimately decide it's not right for you. Similarly, many practices are deciding whether tools like an instant chat feature, the ability to chat with a representative while they're still visiting at your site, practices today are testing those tools to identify whether they're right both for their patient audience and for their practice. Consider a dedicated mobile device for your team. There are many platforms as we look today as practices are diversifying onto sites like Twitter and Instagram that are simply easier to maintain when you're on a mobile device like a smartphone or a tablet. Unfortunately, what we see in many cases is that practices who don't realize that it's easier have staff members that are using personal cell phones and tablets in order to gain this advantage. In many of those cases, those devices aren't engaged in the really sort of basic, the fundamentals of practice security. They wouldn't be HIPAA compliant. And the practice is going to need to decide, do we want to have a centralized device that remains inside the office, that's carefully protected, that we share between staff members, that can be used to address those platforms where having a mobile device is actually an advantage. And then having clear training in place where practice members understand how to protect in the U.S. The HIPAA privacy. In Canada, we have things like PIPEDA and the CASL regulation for email marketing. How do they protect the practice by abiding by those guidelines? And what are the protocols where we might escalate both privacy concerns and critical inquiries that are coming in through these channels? And so these are all opportunities for practice leadership to step back, ask some questions, make some decisions, and lead the evolution inside the office. Now, the next thing we have to look at is how do we distribute these responsibilities? Some of you, in fact, I see on the list, this is one of the questions that already came in, do we need to hire somebody new for this? And the short answer is probably not. But you do need to revisit your job descriptions. And for those of you who don't have job descriptions for all of your roles, I will say tisk, tisk, tisk. It's an important part of the success of your team. It's time to make sure you have job descriptions. And this is, I think, a call to revisit those job descriptions and potentially distribute a new set of responsibilities. Now, I'll take a pause here for a second because I'm about to show you some very dense opportunity to simply reach out to your account executive and ask for a copy of the patient service responsibilities document. We'll send that to you right away. If you're not one of our clients and you're listening to this webinar either live today or in the recording and you'd like a copy of that document, here's all you need to do. Send me some feedback. How can I improve on the quality of our presentation? You can email it to me directly. My email will be at the end of the presentation. Or better yet, if you like today's presentation, leave us some feedback on Facebook. Send a little thanks along for the content that we're sharing today. And in response, we'll be happy to message you directly and send you a copy of this responsibilities document for you to use as well. Because there's a lot here. In the first category, we look at patient service and communication. And we have the obvious things like monitoring those electronic inquiries across multiple platforms that we've talked about, and perhaps some of the less obvious responsibilities like the very last bullet on this list, contributing content to your blog and social media sites. Now, what you'll notice is at the end of each bulleted point of each responsibility, we note either junior or senior. Now, what this means is that this responsibility, the junior responsibility, may be appropriate for a member of your staff who is lower in the hierarchy or has fewer years of experience with the practice. Those items that are marked for senior responsibilities obviously are going to be something that needs to be somebody who maybe has a higher level of trust and responsibility inside the practice. But we take a look beyond those basic patient service and communication issues, and we focus on things like patient feedback and online reviews. So having an advocate who can both collect and report on feedback and evaluate some of the data that you're going to be given so that they can make suggestions for changes within the practice, as well as a champion for online reviews, someone who helps to guide the whole of your practice to encourage the online reviews on all of the platforms that matter the most, and supporting you when a strategic response to negative reviews becomes necessary. But just a quick reminder here for everybody who's on the call who is an Etna Interactive client, that's a part of what your account executives are trained to help you with, is to address the eventual, and I think in many cases, inevitable negative reviews that can happen. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we focus as well on knowledge and reporting and recognize that those people who are touching the relationship that you have with patients in the electronic world have the opportunity not only to grow their knowledge base, but to share what their findings are up the chain so that the practice can make better decisions informed by the data that we're gathering and that we're exposed to on those electronic channels. Right, so those responsibilities, we've gathered that together in a single document. If you'd like a copy of that, again, if you're an Etna client, just email your account executive. They'll be ready to send that back over to you. If you're not a client, shoot me an email. We'll share that email here in just a second. Give me some honest feedback about what you thought about this presentation today. And alternately, which I think would be even greater, if you love the presentation, let us know on Facebook. We'll message you back and be happy to share a copy of that document. The last point here as we talk about service leadership is there's an opportunity to leverage technology. Now, in the interest and respect for everybody's time, I just wanted just touch on this topic at a high level. We are planning some follow-up webinars and recordings a little bit later in the year where we'll dive into this in greater detail. But as you look more closely at these challenges, you're going to realize there are some opportunities for technology to help. Many practices use platforms to allow multiple agents, multiple members of their team, to share responsibilities for handling leads. I'm not going to name specific ones here because there are different platforms in, well, I'll use examples. In aesthetics, we see platforms like MyMedLeads have become very popular. In ophthalmology, MD Prospects is a popular platform. But every vertical, every clinical specialty has evolved different tools that are common and respected to help them share the responsibility of managing electronic communications when there's multiple parties. Similarly, there's great tools out there for monitoring multiple social media channels and aggregating reviews and feedback. And when you know what your issues are, it's the time for you as the leader to say, well, let's ask the question, how do we use technology better to save our staff time? Let's start to bring all these pieces back together. For those of you who have questions, let's go ahead and begin kind of having you type in those questions now so we're ready as we move into the QA session. But to sum up, when we think about the challenge today, remember, my goal was to set a vision for the future, to create that compelling case where we understand that patients, their communications are necessarily fragmenting, and no matter whether we like it or not. And it's up to us, help our teams be successful in this world as it changes, to adapt the way we recruit and train to that skill set those operational parameters and protocols, define our hours of operation, our expectation for response timing, the devices that we provide to our team, and the training that's evident and available for our protocols around protecting privacy, and then distribute those responsibilities between either existing members of our team or to new hires who are brought in to join and support the practice. Remember that you're not going to be alone in doing this. There are technology solutions that are out there. We'll talk about this and some other deeper aspects of this topic a little bit later in the year, but that there's an opportunity to step back and say, let's evaluate options to help us be more successful in servicing really these valuable challenge that you have today, walking away from this new information that you have in 3 years as it relates to supporting patients from around the web. In summary, and we've got some great questions coming in here right now, so we'll move to that in just a second. Service, it's increasingly a visible part of your marketing. Right? And what we know from the research that we've done is if you aren't good at service, that's a part of your marketing too, and it will be reflected in negative reviews. That patients increasingly want prompt and professional service across many different channels. They want to get it on phone, of course. They want it on their email. Many practices are still struggling there today. And as we look to the future, they're moving to platforms like Yelp, direct messaging on industry-specific channels like RealSelf. They are messaging you on sites like Facebook and Instagram. They're messaging about you on those same sites even when you're not there. And for practices with blogs, if you're not watching your blog comments, they're actually leaving comments directly on the blog as well. Your reputation and inquiry volume, they're really going to be dependent over the next couple of years on how you evolve. If you choose to bury as leaders, it's up to you. It's your opportunity. I would say it's your responsibility to envision the future of service and make sure that you take the steps necessary to align the team to build that reality for your office. I promised that I'd share that email. Again, for those that want a copy of that deck, what you need to do is send that email out directly to ryan@etnainteractive.com. Let me know, share some feedback about what you thought about today's presentation. Better yet, and I think I'd like this even more, give us some feedback directly on Facebook about how we did, and we'll respond back to you and offer you a copy of that responsibilities document as well. And it's time now for us to move into the Q&A. So one of the questions that comes in is, what if there's an associate in the office who responds to a potential client, but to client leads, but in a way that could come off as overbearing or desperate? How do I address this without being insulting? How would we move forward with keeping in touch with these prospects? So Diana, that's a great question. There's two parts in that. One, I think, is a question about how do we coach our team to ensure that the quality of our responses is in keeping with the brand of our practice. And I think very few would say our brand is desperate, right? Some of you are going to say our brand is about exceptional clinical care. Some will say it's about a very personal and human approach to these procedures. Still others will say, our brand is really focused on the credentials of our surgeon or our MD. And in all those cases, I think ultimately candid conversations are the way to start. Bring those email communications to light and let the party know that you're not doing it because you don't have faith in them or that you don't believe that they're a good writer, but instead that you're hoping to elevate the contribution that they make to the practice. So the long and the short of it is you need to both look at writing samples, have active coaching and engagement. These are great things to potentially review either with a subcommittee in the office or as a part of regular staff meetings, and talk very frankly, how could we do this better? How do we think this particular email sounds to our prospects? Similarly, the use of templates or starter text, of course with the training that we're going to customize that for every inquiry, is a great way to coach staff members who are challenged to deal with a large volume of inquiries. So that's a great question, Diana. For your second part is how would we move forward with keeping in touch with these prospects? There are some rules that you need to set about how you wish to use electronic communications to keep in touch. Many practices have email newsletters, and they use that as a principal vehicle where they're gaining permission from the prospect to add them to a list, to send marketing communications directly from the practice at some kind of frequency or interval. That's going to be important. But when you're dealing with that one-off communication, many practices will decide on an acceptable number of follow-ups. I think for many it's a maximum of 2 to 3. And most clinics in our experience will try to move conversations off of email and onto the phone as quickly as possible. Any recommendations, Sharia, specifically for plastic surgery clinics? And I believe that was a question about how to handle leads with multiple parties. There are some great platforms that are out there. For those that use practice management software, EMR, my advice is to first ask your EMR, your practice management software provider, if they have a secure messaging platform. Secure messaging, we have to all acknowledge there's some barriers to getting new patients enrolled on there that can impact communications, but it's good to examine that in this, in this world that we live in where patient privacy is a real concern. And for those that are looking for more marketing-centric practice, as it turns out, we know that ASAPS is coming up. There'll be at least 3 or 4 good examples on the trade show floor where you could talk with those vendors and examine their options. So I'll avoid any commercial here today. So it sounds like, Cindy asked the question that a small practice would be overwhelmed to try to do all of this by themselves. When practice funds are low already, how can a practice keep up with this? And Cindy, I have a lot of empathy for this challenge because it's the acknowledgement that things are getting more complicated. And to gain access to the same quantity and quality of opportunity from maybe 5 years ago, all of whom would have maybe just emailed your practice, we now have to have people who are watching more channels and doing more work. And what I can say, Cindy, is that in my experience, even small practices have the opportunity to provide more clarity to their staff about the roles and the value, the roles and responsibilities, and the potential value of their contributions, and that simply by taking the time to update job descriptions, provide both clear direction and the training to be successful, that members of your team can begin to diversify the monitoring and the communication that they're offering for the practice so that you can be more successful. And in many cases, that then further the growth of the practice. So like most things when we talk about leadership, lead with small wins, and let's let those small wins and hopefully fund our continued growth. Janie asked the question, as a plastic surgery office, are there specific review websites that we recommend, i.e. Real Self, and where do you draw the line at how many to use? So this is a question that's actually not just about plastic surgery offices, and this is a question that we get all the time from all of the clinical specialties that we serve. And the answer that we always give is that diversification matters. Sites that are popular today may not be popular tomorrow. And if you put all of your review eggs into one website's basket, you're creating liability for the practice. Now, in the aesthetic space, certainly Real Self is popular, but what we know today is that reviews that appear directly on Google, for example, as well as Yelp, can have an equally significant impact for the practice and may be very, very important for you to focus on. We generally recommend a strategy in which you focus on between 5 and 7 of the most visible review sites in your market. How do you know which ones are most visible? Search for your clinical specialty plus the word reviews in Google and see which sites come up. Commonly what you're going to see are sites like Yelp. Maybe today you're going to see Facebook popping up as a prominent player, and health grade. And that's specific about Ruth, about a specific piece of software. I think for our purposes today, I'll try to take that offline and get you an email. We're just coming up on that 45 or past that 45-minute mark. Responsibilities document. If you're a client of Etna, please just shoot your account executive an email. If you aren't a client, you can email me directly at the email that appears on your screen right now. I would value feedback on the presentation, and in exchange, I will give you a copy of that document, or if you wish to share your feedback with us directly on Facebook at facebook.com/Etna Interactive, we'll get back to you and get you a copy of that document to say thank you as well. As a reminder, thank you, Shari, for asking. To everyone, we've recorded today's presentation, and in just a few days' time, this will be available inside of our Learning Center. We'll send out an email so that you can watch this again or share it with your peers and colleagues. I want to thank all of you for the time that you've invested here with me today, and wish you a successful close to your week. Have a great day. Bye-bye.